Hi, this is Christina Shala, and welcome to another episode of Empowering the Educator Within. In today's episode, we're going to look at different strategies for your beginner ELL students' academic. Before getting into different teaching strategies, it's first important to understand the difference between academic language and teaching academic content. Academic language refers to the teaching of Tier 1, Tier 2, and Tier 3 vocabulary. For more information on these types of vocabulary words, check out the 3 tiers of academic language video. Teaching academic content refers to teaching the actual curriculum objectives that must be covered in each subject area. Why is teaching academic content so important? Well, first and foremost, eliminating learning gaps. If you're not, for your planning, you're going to need a copy of your ELL matrix or the standards that have been given to you by your school. Now, your biggest challenge for planning for your beginner ELL students is merging the ELL matrix or standards that you've. A big question that many teachers have is how much usage of a child's native language or mother tongue is appropriate at the beginning when it comes to teaching and learning academic content. And in the beginning, it has to be 100% child's native tongue. I mean, they've got zero English. And I like to take a look at it sort of as this pendulum where they start out at 100% their native tongue or mother tongue, 0% English, and you're slowly shifting that pendulum so that it's opposite until they get to 100% English, 0% in their native tongue, native language. And this takes time. And so you're slowly going to bring them, it'll be like 90% native language to 10% English, then it will be 50-50, and then it will flip until you eventually get to that point. But it's a slow process. And so you've just got to keep that in mind, that it's not something that's going to come overnight, and it's something that you've got to plan for as you're differentiating and scaffolding for your beginner ELL students. Before getting into different ways that you can differentiate for your ELL students, it's important to understand what differentiating means. And this can be done in 3 different ways. The first way is to provide different sets of learning outcomes for your ELL students. The next would be to provide them different ways to access the information. And lastly, allowing them different ways to demonstrate their learning. Strategies that I'm going to share with you for reading for your beginner ELL students are different from the ones that I shared in a prior video where I talked about teaching academic language, because now the focus is not on teaching English, but the focus is on how to get students to access the information and the curriculum content. And so when it comes to reading, a lot of it has to do with finding materials and sourcing materials in their native language or mother tongue. So it can be finding worksheets or texts that are on topics that you're covering in class in their native language. If you can't find materials, you can use Google Translate, and that actually has a feature where you can snap a photo of the worksheet or the text that you're giving the students, and it will translate it for them. Now, this isn't ideal. It's not an exact translation, but it will be close enough that your students will be able to follow along and get the gist. So I mentioned Google Translate, but Microsoft Translator is also another good option for this. Also, finding little short videos, YouTube clips that are in English, and then putting the subtitles for them in their native language, or vice versa. And then also, there's this handy little thing on EduAid AI called a Lexile Decreaser, where you can copy and paste a text that you're giving your students and decrease the level of difficulty of English. So if your students are ready for this, that's also a good option. And then 2, as I mentioned, differentiating means providing different outcomes to your ELL students. Your expectations of what you're going to be assessing them on as far as their reading skills are going to have to be different from the rest of your class. In addition, any assessments that you're giving your students are also going to have to look different in order for your students to access what you're teaching and demonstrate that they understood what it is that listening strategies are similar to the reading strategies, because you're basically trying to find a different way to present the content to your ELL students, a different way that they can access that information. And it will be through finding audio text or audio books in their native language or native tongue, so that they can listen and follow along and understand what it is that you're talking about in class. Again, you're going to need to look at different outcomes to provide them with. The expectations cannot be the same as for the rest of your students. And also, you're going to need to take a look at different ways of assessing their listening skills. So switching over now into ways that students can demonstrate their knowledge, let's take a look at some different strategies for writing. Now, it's important to keep in mind that when we're talking about looking at writing activities for your ELL students, when we're focused on academic content, you're not looking at academic language or how well they can write in English. You're simply looking at, did they understand what was covered in class? And so ways you can differentiate for your beginner ELL students would be to allow them to write in their native tongue or mother tongue. And you can take an app like Google Translate, snap a photo of their work, and see if they understood what was being talked about. Other ways to differentiate for them would be to give them smaller assignments than the rest of the class, or maybe different assignments. Could be still on the same topic that the rest of the class is covering, but their assignment just looks different. And then, similar to reading and listening, providing them different outcomes and providing them different assessments. When it comes to speaking, again, you're looking at ways that students can demonstrate their knowledge, but this time orally. And using an app like Say Hi will allow you to do this, because a student can speak in their native language and it will translate into English for you. Now, although not perfect, you'll get enough of an idea to know if they understood what was being covered. Also, you might have a situation where there are other students who speak the same language as the ELL student but have a higher level of English. So if you were to pair them up, that they could translate for them. So whereas the rest of the class might be presenting individually, you might allow your beginner ELL student to present with a partner. And then, similar to reading and listening and writing, you're going to need to look at different outcomes for them, and also different ways that you're going to assess their speaking. Moving on from different strategies for differentiating, let's take a look at some different strategies for scaffolding. But before doing that, what What does scaffolding mean? Well, it simply means that you are going to give different strategies or supports to help your students access the content. Let's start with some strategies for reading. Now, you'll notice that some of the ones that I'm giving here for academic content overlap with academic language, but the focus is more on getting the information across. The first one, and the one that, as I mentioned before, I consider the most important, would be pre-teaching the vocabulary. Giving them lists of 10 to 15 words before a unit starts, allowing them a few days or a week to learn them, gives them that jump start that they need into understanding the information that's being presented. Also, lots of visuals and videos. These videos can have, they can be in their native language with English subtitles or vice versa. Those will help your students in accessing the information. Providing charts and diagrams to go along with text are also very useful. Putting up a word wall in your class, a vocabulary wall. It can be the words with pictures, and just having them somewhere within view for your beginner ELL students would be great. They can just sort of quickly refer to the words as they hear them being talked about in class or being read in class, and just kind of gives them a way to access what's being presented. Also, you can take a look at activating prior knowledge. So finding out what they already know about the topic before it starts, but maybe in their native tongue. And chunking the information into smaller bits so that it's easier for them to access. Different supports that you can use with your ELL students when it comes to listening would be to speak slowly when presenting academic content, repeat yourself a few times, to be conscious of the language that you're using and to simplify it, to check frequently for understanding, to use a lot of nonverbal cues, and to ensure that you've got visuals or objects that accompany what you're talking about, so it makes it easier for them to understand the information that you're presenting. Supports that you can provide your ELL students for writing include giving them sentence starters, frames, prompts, and word banks. So that way, when they're going to share their knowledge, they've kind of got some starting points to work from. Allowing them the use of online editing tools is also helpful. Providing them with bilingual dictionaries. Allowing them extra time to complete assignments. Providing them with graphic organizers or modeling sentences for them and providing them with examples as starting points are all great ways that you can sort of get your students sharing their knowledge in English, but where it takes a bit of that pressure off of them because some of the work has been started for them, or else they've got the extra tools there to help them in expressing them. Some scaffolding ideas that work well for speaking include allowing students to respond non-verbally, and also allowing them to make errors when they're speaking. So, putting aside the fact that perhaps they've made a vocabulary mistake or a grammatical error. Increasing the time that they have to present or share their knowledge is also helpful. Allowing them to use a translator app like Say Hi works well as a scaffolding strategy for your beginner ELLs. When it comes to group work, reassigning their role alleviates a lot of stress for them. This way, not only does the ELL student know what they're expected to do, but so does the rest of the group. And so it just kind of helps with that dynamic as they're working together. And then giving them sentence starters or prompts to help them get going when sharing their ideas is also a great scaffolding strategy.
Resources. We've covered a bunch of different strategies for differentiating and scaffolding, and you're thinking, well, that sounds great, but where do I get the resources to support the ELLs? And so if your students, for example, their native language is French or Spanish, you're probably not going to have a super hard time finding things. But if, for example, their native language is Russian or Ukrainian, it does become a little bit more challenging. So if you're doing a novel study in class, you might be able to find a book version or the audio version of the book through Amazon or Indigo or Scholastics. For units that you are covering in class, you may be able to find similar ones through Teachers Pay Teachers, especially, again, if the student's native language is French or Spanish. There's quite a few paid subscriptions that offer reading materials, and some even have little videos that focus on academic content, but at the level of your beginner ELL students. So some good ones to check out would be BrainPop ELL, Raz Plus, and Epic. For ones that have free resources and materials that touch on some academic content you might be covering, you can check out Unite for Literacy and Storybooks Canada.
So when it comes to evaluating and reporting on your beginner ELL's progress, it's important to keep in mind that what you are essentially looking for when it comes to academic content is, could they meet curriculum objectives in some way, shape, or form, regardless of language, in science, math, social, art? Because if they can, then there is no reason why they can't receive a performing at grade level or a proficient or an A or a B in those subject areas. The only area or subject where they would not be performing at grade level would obviously be language arts, because their language skills just aren't there yet. But for everything else, just remember you're looking at academic content, not language, but what they know and what they can demonstrate. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of Empowering the Educator Within. Join us next time, where we'll take a look at strategies for teaching conversational English to beginner ELL students. See you next time.